If you're a longtime viewer of the Christian television network, no doubt you have watched at least one interview with Attorney Joe Pippen. It might have been with Herman Bailey, Bob DeAndre, or with me here on Homekeepers. In recent days, I have watched those interviews and discovered a treasure trove of information that has undoubtedly been a blessing to thousands of our viewers.
Now let me say, I have a living will.
And I do too. You made it for me.
And most of my clients, I'd say 90% of my clients have living wills. And the reason I have one is that I don't want my family to have to make that decision.
That's right.
Number one. And if I'm in a vegetative or unconscious or end-stage condition, I'm ready to go.
Joe was a devoted churchman, and beside his law practice, television appearances, and a long-running radio program, he loved to help Christians by going to their churches, and he conducted special seminars to help them with those end-of-life issues.
I love going into churches. I just did one, went into a church the other night, and if somebody called me and if it's open on my calendar, I'll go. And it could be a couple-hour drive, it doesn't matter. And basically what I talk about when I go into churches is estate planning, of course, and being a good steward of what you have. I think you're charged with being, having the duty of being a good steward, providing for your family, doing wise things, saving, probate. You don't have to go through probate, saving taxes, and really, really taking care of special needs within families. There's so many families. Almost every family has some dysfunction, in it. So as an estate planning attorney, I ask enough questions. If there is some dysfunction, I want to find it and then deal with it in the estate plan. For example, if you have 3 or 4 children, there's a good chance one of them is going to go through marital difficulties. You want to protect the estate for your bloodline, not the in-laws. Sometimes you have children with drug or alcohol addictions. You don't want to give them a lump sum of money. You want to have them go through testing programs and so forth before they get their inheritance and be free and clear.
Wow, I never thought of that.
There are children on government benefits where if you give them a lump sum of money, they lose their benefits. So one of the things on the Medicaid book, we talk about if you know anybody in a nursing home and they're on private pay, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month, there are ways to rearrange things and get the government benefits they're entitled to. On the asset protection book, there are ways to protect your estate. If you have a small business, you want to be incorporated. And then you do want a limited liability company, an S corporation, a C corporation. It goes through the various ways that you can, how do you protect your assets?
Because of his radio career of more than 30 years, Joe was certainly that go-to attorney for wills and trusts here in the Tampa Bay area. We talked about the value of free information and advice over the airways. Also, the examples of some very famous people.
For example, but didn't have anything in it. He forgot to fund his trust. There's been a Supreme Court justice who tried to write their own will, mainly in constitutional law, things like that.
A Supreme Court justice?
And he didn't have it witnessed. So people do make mistakes that really try.
Yeah.
These legal sites that suggest you purchase a will or a trust, most all of those I've reviewed, there have been mistakes in them. And they didn't have the opportunity to go one-on-one with the discussion where I could ask you questions and figure out what you really want to do in your document and then draft the document to fit what you're trying to do. You can't do that online for the most part.
You just took my next comment away from me, and that was that I've known Joe a long time, and he's my go-to person if I need. And that is the value of a good attorney, is they ask the questions when you're sitting in there. Questions that the layperson would never, ever, ever, ever think of it.
Well, suppose you came to me and said, I just want to leave everything to my children, and I didn't ask you any questions. And then one of those children was a grandchild. And that's who you really wanted to leave it to, but you meant to say my children and grandchildren. But, unless you ask questions about how old they are, and are they financially responsible, and do you want to give it to them all at once, or do you want to do a little stretch, and do you have a retirement account, and do you want to have that go all at once, or do you want to stretch that out over time? And there are just a lot of questions you ask when you're trying to do a document to get it to suit the needs of the person you're doing it for.
So you have to be very specific. If you go to see your attorney, I think it'd be a good idea to make a list of your own questions, but the good attorney will ask you your questions. Okay, what if someone is a resident of more than one state, and would my will and trust, if say I moved to California or something, does it work there?
Well, you're only a primary resident of one state, but if you move from one to another, you should have the documents reviewed and maybe modified for the new state. But if you were a Florida resident, had your documents in Florida, and moved to California and died before you did anything, one state will honor another state's documents and contracts. But it'd be better if you could get them reviewed and updated in the new state.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm at the point right now I need to come in and review. Do you have a timeline of how often this kind of document should be reviewed?
I try to send my clients a letter for every 3 years. They should be updated or reviewed every 3 years.
Because things change, don't they?
Yeah, there's no charge in our office. There's no charge to review clients for a new documents for a new client, or review and have a meeting with old clients. It should come back in about every 3 years. A lot of times, power of attorneys and healthcare surrogates and living wills are the things that really need to be updated. And a lot of times, their will and trust are just fine unless there's been a major tax law change or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Jill once visited us during the Christmas season. And before we talked business, I asked him about his Christian faith.
Well, I was raised in a Christian home. My dad was the superintendent of Sunday schools as a volunteer job. Mm-hmm. So all of the Sunday schools used to meet together before they used to separate out into their groups. Mm-hmm. And I had taken piano lessons for 5 years. So I think one time they didn't have a piano player, so they dragged me up there to play the song, and it happened to be Rock of Ages. And the big joke was everybody was out of breath when I finished. I did a little fast beat to it. But I was raised in a Christian home. I think I was born again, really, though, after I moved to Florida. Mm-hmm. I enrolled our kids in a Christian school, and the pastor came out one night and asked me all those questions and kind of led me back. I guess we'd strayed a little bit and stopped going to church a little bit when after college and starting working and going to night law school. But I remember that day he came in there, and I remember accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior. Now, I was baptized early when I was a kid, but I think it really took a little bit later in life.
I've known you a long time, very steadfast, devoted churchman. And how long have you been married to Beverly? Beautiful Beverly?
We got married in 1969, so 43 years.
Yeah. Well, I also wondered, at what age did you decide you want to be an attorney?
Well, I used to watch Perry Mason as a kid, and I think I got hooked.
He always won.
Yeah, he did.
Mm-hmm.
He had a good staff, and I really didn't know what kind of law I wanted to practice, but I knew I wanted to help people. I think that's one of my gifts is to just want to help people.
Yeah, that was my next question. Why wills and trusts and all instead of crime or family?
Yeah, I think every attorney that goes through law school wants to be a prosecutor or defense attorney or criminal attorney. That's kind of what you're thinking about when you go in. I never really wanted to do that. I didn't start practicing law until I was 35, and I was in my third career when I started that. And actually never been in the law office when I started my own practice, and went out. In that first year, I did everything. I did bankruptcy, I did criminal, I did divorce law, and I just gravitated into estate planning. Primarily is what I do. I have other attorneys who do other areas, but it just seemed quick and easy. It was a big service. Everybody was happy. A lot of people had been wanting to do it for a long time. So I just found a little niche, basically.
And I would say I think it's more important now than it ever was. Now we're going to talk about legal New Year resolutions. And I've heard the term bucket list. I think it came out of a movie.
Yeah.
Somebody, they wanted to do all this before they, left this world. So, for a more updated look.
Probably estate planning wasn't on that list, though.
Probably not. But I thought maybe people could relate a little bit. So what do you think is the most, I think people feel really overwhelmed when they think about this, so it's really easy to put it off.
Right. And you're not going to die tomorrow, so you can just do it tomorrow, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's what they think. I usually say people like to put off estate planning because they don't like dealing with dying. Mm-hmm. They don't like dealing with parting with their assets and friends, and some people don't like attorneys. No, I don't understand that one.
Yeah.
But, right.
No.
But they just put it off. And most people that come to my office that have put it off for a long time, they're just so relieved because it didn't take that long.
Right.
It didn't cost that much, and they got one more thing they can check off their list of things to do. And you can just see a peace come over them when they finally get this done.
Mm-hmm. On one of the Homekeepers programs, we talked about the value of talk radio and the great opportunity for listeners to talk directly to professionals whether it be medical, doctors, financial planners, or attorneys.
Well, I remember one lady called in and wanted to know if she could probate her own will. Now, you have to die before your will goes through probate, so it's impossible to do that yourself.
It's a good thing you were on radio because you might have had an interesting look on your face on television.
I think I've been asked so many questions, my expression doesn't change too much most of the time. So this lady, though, what made it even more interesting was she didn't quite understand, so I had to explain it about 3 times. And a lot of people will call me and not like the answer, so they'll try to rephrase it slightly, hoping for a different answer. But I usually come back with the same answer, and then sometimes they get a little frustrated. Mm-hmm. I had one man that called, and he was talking so slow, which is just not good for people listening to radio. I mean, he would talk, I don't even want to take the time to tell you how slow he was talking. But so I finally got him to tell me what the problem was, and he said, well, the funeral home director was giving him trouble because he couldn't get the gold from his mother's teeth from the funeral. And then, I didn't know, I was so taken back by the question, I kind of chuckled, and I said, well, and then in his very slow way of talking, he said that I was going to laugh at him like everyone else has with that question.
Oh.
So now I'm on live radio talking to this fellow who talks extremely slow, and now I've got to answer why, to tell him I wasn't laughing at him. I was just kind of pausing to think about how I was going to answer this question. Mm-hmm. But I have questions like a guy back in the 80s when the service stations used to check your oil. Mm-hmm. Some guy went into a service station and they bent his dipstick, and that was a question about.
Oh, I need a lawyer.
So I've had some crazy questions. It's been a lot of fun, though. And I don't, unlike most shows, I don't screen my calls. Mm-hmm. So I'll take almost any
chance, yeah.
Yeah, take any question, and the ones that are more entertaining and not so educational, but just entertaining.
Gotta mix it up.
That makes for fun radio. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what talk radio is all about.
What's the kind of the theme of the most popular question? Is it the trust? Is it the will?
Well, I think the most popular theme generally is estate planning, because that's my primary practice area. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in between calls or something as interesting has happened in the world of estate planning, or maybe even something with my clients, I'll talk about that topic briefly. So I talk more about estate planning than I do other issues for the most part.
After knowing Joe Pippen for more than 3 decades, I believe it was the consistency of his life and testimony that was most impressive. It was evident as the husband of his dream girl, Beverly, his sweet and faithful wife for more than 50 years. As for his sons, Trey and Troy, their admiration for their father knew no bounds. He encouraged his Christian clients to leave behind a testimony for their loved ones. And for those of us privileged to know him, he has left a strong, never-to-be-forgotten example. My treasured colleagues here at the Christian Television Network join me in offering our love to his family and pray that they will truly sense the presence of the God of all comfort. I think we've been watching some clips of a life well lived. And I've asked my friend Herman Bailey to join me because he knew Joe Pippen before I did. Yeah. And he's just been a blessing around this network. He's been on programs with Bob DeAndre.
Oh, yeah.
But also, I think as you get older and you measure people's lives.
We're old?
You think about, yeah, we're old.
Okay.
We both have great grandchildren, by the way.
We've been buddies for 45 years.
At least, yeah. I think the thing I admire the most is the consistency of a person, and that would describe Joe Pippen.
Joe Pippen, and also patience. Did you ever listen to his Ask an Attorney?
I heard just clips of it from time to time.
I would listen to whole programs, depending on where I was going or whatever, listen on. And I think it was the longest running of that type program
Yes, it was in Tampa
ever.
Bay.
Yes. Anyway, he had the most awesome patience because I did radio for 3 years. You know, you call in, talk live with Herman Bailey, and the reason I admired him, he would get, these people would ask him questions about something pertaining to their wills or their children or what they should do or what kind of will and what was included, and they would ask the question and he would answer it, and then they would go right back and ask the question again, and he would just as calmly, he wouldn't say, "Excuse me, you just asked the question." He had the most calming voice. It's like you'd go, "Is there any way to make this guy mad?" And the answer would be no.
Never saw that manifested in his family life. That says a lot about a man.
Yeah.
And
He was your attorney too, right?
oh yeah,
And Sharon and I.
yes, and he was very kind to my mother. We needed her to sign something when she was 98.
Yeah.
And took her to the office. She could still sign, and boy, she bantered back and forth with him. And
Let me tell you a quick story. A friend of mine, his dad, and he was the only child, he had no idea, and his dad was very old, and he had no idea how to ask his dad about his estate. He said he never shared ever anything with me. And so he told me, he said, "But you know who he loves? He watches your program and he sees you with Joe Pippen, the attorney." And I said, "I tell you what, he was about 50 miles away. I said, bring your dad over. I'll take him to his office and let him ask him questions and lay out what he should have in his will." I mean, he trusted him so much. He was sitting there, and the son could not believe. Everything that he had, he opened up to Joe Pippen, and he told him exactly what he would do and what he needed to do. Well, I think it was only a couple of years later, he passed.
everything
If that
was
hadn't
ordered.
happened, I mean, the probate would have had a killing on what he left.
Yeah, that was probably the type of person, because of his age and all, that you set
Yes.
up for him to
Right.
meet Joe, who didn't like attorneys. Probably scared to death of them.
Well, that's why he told me. He said, "My dad will never talk to him." He said, "Because he don't trust him." And he said, "But he loves Joe Pippen." He would watch him on the program because he just communicated honesty, love, and he had that calming demeanor. And so he was
Always
willing
the
to meet
same.
with him.
And you and I and Sharon, your wife, were at his memorial.
Yes.
And
Fabulous.
I have played for dozens and dozens, I'd say maybe hundreds of funerals in my life, played organ. And that funeral service tells a lot about the departed.
Yeah.
And boy, he was honored in this day of COVID. It was a really fine
Yeah.
turnout, fine audience and all. And the things that were said, how he flew, I think, to the Northwest with a pastor to address churches, which he did generously.
Charlie
Five-
Martin would take him on these
Yes.
trips, yes.
Yeah, and 5 people were there, and
Yeah.
this man, like Joe, signed
Yeah.
up. After Joe left, about 2 weeks later, that man gave $500,000 to the church, which was that outgrowth of Joe, the giver. He'd go to churches, he'd go anywhere to help people.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, the fact that he was walking with his high school sweetheart on the sand on a beach in Jacksonville, Florida,
Gone just like that.
just like that.
And he called her his dream girl, Beverly, his wonderful wife of more than 50 years. And on his phone, if he needed to call her, her name wasn't there, it was Dream Girl.
Wow.
He had Dream Girl and
Wow.
would talk to her. Just overall, life well lived. His sons admired him so much.
Oh my goodness, I actually did this. I told my son, I was talking to him the next day, I said, I want to get his sons what he talked about his dad and have you memorize it.
Yes, that was beautiful. We are about out of time, but really wanted to honor a wonderful guest who has been with this network for at least 35 years on some regular basis, and I've often thought of the wonderful people in Nebraska and Kansas and all that didn't know anything about a will or a trust. He introduced it to them and probably helped thousands of people he never knew about. Please join me next time, remembering there's no higher calling than that of a homekeeper. God bless you.